Hello and welcome friends, I am That Happy Viking and I would like to present to you my set review of Ikoria for Gentry. If you have no idea what Gentry is, check the description below this video for more information. In this episode, we will be looking at multicolor, colorless and land cards. First up we have Jubilant Skybonder, a 3-mana uncommon flying creature that has creatures you control with flying, have spells your opponents cast that target this creature, cost 2 more to cast. We currently do have some focus on on flying decks, however they are somewhat pinched on their uncommon slots, and either feature tons of little flyers where you don't really care to have this effect, or one really important flyer where you kind of need more protection than this offers. So I don't really see a home for it, but I could imagine a widespread protection strategy around frail creatures to happen. I don't think it will see it. Skycat Sovereign is a 2-mana rare flying creature. It's a 1/1, gets +1/+1 for each other creature you control with flying, and for 4 mana you get to create a 1/1 white cat bird creature token with flying. Like I said, we have 2 different kinds of flying oriented decks currently in the meta game. And in the surprisingly called blue-white flyers shell, I totally see this competing for a slot. The first companion. Companions are really interesting. Let's talk about the concept first a little bit. A companion is a card that you may cast outside of your deck if your deck has a certain requirement. So your companion should live in your sideboard. Before you start a game, you may declare that a card in your sideboard is your companion if it has the companion ability, and then you'll be able to cast it whenever you can pay for its mana cost. So it's sort of like a commander, but if it dies, it dies. It doesn't go back to your sideboard or your command zone. So in Gentry, that means these are rares that as long as you limit your deck to the restrictions they give you, will always be available to you, which is a really strong tool and is being looked at very strictly on how this will impact Gentry. Yorion the Sky Nomad is a 5-mana rare. It's a 4/5 flying. If you want to have it as your companion, your starting deck has to contain at least 20 cards more than the minimum deck size. So you need to have an 80-card deck. When it enters the battlefield, you may exile any number of other non-land permanents you own and control. Return those cards to the battlefield at the beginning of the next end step. We already seen there's a bunch of support for flicker decks in blue, and it's pretty rough to go from 60 to 80 cards, but it might be worth it. In those decks, this effect, besides being a 4/5 flyer for 5 mana, could easily represent 2 to 3 extra cards in the mid to late game if you have managed to secure a board presence. I do expect people to try and go for this. I like this companion one of the best because it's a really easy, quick check. See if you did the requirements correctly. Don't forget as well that you don't have to use this as a companion. You can also just put this inside your deck, draw it naturally, and have the effect that way. Not sure if playing it that way is going to be good enough to warrant this. I do think people are going to try it as a companion, and we'll see. Dire Tactics is a 2-mana uncommon instant that exiles a creature. If you do not control a human, you lose life equal to that creature's toughness. This is going to get played. There are already 2 black-white concepts available, a humans focus deck, and even the black-white sacrifice deck has a bunch of humans and will really appreciate this kind of effect. It is something that can be awkward against very aggressive decks or decks that feature very little creatures, which might limit it in its numbers. It will get played for sure though. General Kudro of Dranith is a 3-mana mythic 3/3 creature that gives other humans you control +1/+1. Whenever it or another human enters the battlefield, you may exile a card from an opponent's graveyard. And for 2 mana and sacrificing 2 humans, you get to destroy target creature with power 4 or greater. This is a nice little package that does a little bit of everything. At 3 mana 3/3, it has a solid body, it buffs your entire team if you build your deck that way, and it fights interaction in a way that isn't super relevant to Gentry. Escape isn't really a heavily played mechanic currently, but the sacrificing 2 humans in the token strategy to get rid of big creatures in a environment that got a lot of buffs for both ramp and late game strategies is going to be super relevant. This is the card you start off with if you're building black-white humans. General's Enforcer is a 2 mana uncommon 2/3. That gives legendary humans you control indestructible, and again for 4 mana you may exile a card from a graveyard. If it was a creature, create a 1/1 white human soldier creature token. This is one of those cards that are going to be featured in that deck, not so much for the first ability, but for that second ability and the utility it offers. It isn't good enough to be a 4-off, I think, but as a late game engine that has some anti-strategy utility, I think a 2 or even a 3-off would be warranted. At 2 mana being a 2/3, it's also pretty nice a body to have against aggressive decks. Lurus of the Dream Den is our second companion. It's a 3 mana rare creature with 3/2 with lifelink. If you want to have it as your companion, each permanent card in your starting deck needs to have converted mana cost 2 or less. And if you have it in play, you may cast 1 permanent spell with converted mana cost 2 or less from your graveyard once each turn. This is probably one of the stronger options that we have for Gentry. It allows you to play multiple different strategies that are heavily focused on aggressive starts and 1 and 2 drops, supported by slightly more expensive spells that can really grind out games because it keeps replaying cards from the graveyard. It's going to get played. You can build a mono white life gain shell around it. You can build a mono black life drain shell around it with cat ovens and lampots and other decks. You can splash the red enchantment in there that lets you sacrifice creatures for 2 damage to any target. And there's a lot of fodder cards currently available that really make this a strong plan. So definitely going to see it in multiple decks, I think, and currently is on the watch list even for a possible ban in Gentry. Necropanther is a 3 mana uncommon 3/3. It has mutate 4. Whenever this mutates, return target creature with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. At 3 mana 3/3, this is a very respectable body. It's unfortunate that it has 3 toughness because it will straight up die to the good red removal spells. The mutate cost is hybrid, which means it doesn't need to be a black-white card. The effect is super strong. The fact that it could bring back your General Kudro makes it really, really interesting, even though it is not a human. Definitely expecting people to try and make this work, but it might get pushed out because it lacks a home, really. Lurus decks are the other home where it would be really good because it brings back Lurus, but then it would require you to have Lurus as a creature in the graveyard, in your deck, to be able to play the Necropanther, which takes away some of the allure in it, but then opens up your deck building quite a bit. Cunning Nightbonder is a 2-mana uncommon flash creature that makes it so that spells with flash you cast cost 1 less to cast and can't be countered. I'm not 100% sure how much support flash currently has. There is a bunch of it in here. There's already some in the Dimir cards, but I think at this point it is missing enough support to be an actual deck. So I don't expect to see it for a little while. Geruda, Doom of the Depths, is a 6-mana rare 6/6 companion that requires your starting deck only to contain cards with even converted mana costs. When Geruda enters the battlefield, each player puts the top 4 cards of their library into their graveyard. You may put a land card with an even converted mana cost from amongst those cards onto the battlefield under your control. This card not only is an extra card in a control deck, but could represent another one in that reanimation. The fact that you only have 8 cards to look for that target makes it so that it can easily whiff unless you have some scrying effects ready for your deck at least. The restriction looks pretty rough, but there's a lot you can do with 2 mana, 2 mana being one of the most power dense converted mana costs in the game. For a control deck that wants to set up slowly and has access to cycling effects that let it do stuff for 1 and 3 mana as well, I do think this is playable, more playable than some people want us to believe, but it's going to take somebody with some patience and dedication to really get the payoff here. The fact that it gives a finisher to control decks that will eventually win with pretty much anything is a bit of a strike against it, because you don't need that, and maybe you want your rare to have more impact or be a sweeper. We'll see what people do with it. I know multiple control players that will probably be looking at this as their companion to get there. Slitherwisp is a 3-mana rare creature. It has flash, so there we go with some more flash supports. Whenever you cast another creature that has flash, you draw a card and each opponent loses 1 life. The fact you can't have multiples of these in Gentry really knocks this down a bunch, but like we said, there is support for it, and if there's enough of it, it might be a deck. I don't expect to see it, but this is the kind of card that can really blow up if one of the future sets has some interesting flash cards. Channeled Force is a 4-mana instant uncommon. As an additional cost, you need to discard X cards. Target player, probably you, draws X cards, and then it deals X damage to up to 1 target creature or planeswalker. This doesn't go to the face, so you cannot use this to kill your opponent with damage. That's a big strike against it, and it's super scary to use in matches where your opponent might have counter spells, because you might just lose all the cards you discarded, and it requires you to have a lot of cards in your hand to use it optimally. I don't think this is good enough in the super late game. This can turn some of your extra lands into cards, but it always comes at a risk, and I would prefer not to take that risk. Lore Drakis is a 3-mana uncommon 2/3 that you can mutate for 2. Whenever it mutates, return target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. That's a really interesting effect to have. The mutate isn't so interesting in of its own, like power toughness wise. That effect can be really strong. It also instantly mitigates the risk you run by mutating by putting 2 of your cards into a single pile. I have a very hard time assessing whether this is actually good. It gives a lot of utility, but is it worth it? I think this isn't bad. Well, this looks like the hardest card for me to assess so far, though. I'm trying to think of instants or sorceries that I would like to chain together as much as possible. The only home for it currently is like the second draw decks that use Improbable Alliance, in which it's super awkward because it competes with a bunch of really good cards for slots, and I think that is going to keep it out of contention for now. Lutri, the Spellcaster, the banned card in Commander, is a 3-mana rare 3/2 creature and has companion. Each non-land card in your starting deck has a different name. So you cannot play any duplicates. For your rares that doesn't matter, but that really smears open your uncommons and your commons. It has flash, and when it enters the battlefield, if you cast it, copy target instant or sorcery spell you control, you may choose new targets for the copy. I think that this is the viable troll option in Gentry. I think you can build blue-red spells with this in it and have it function. Do I think it's going to be good? Yes. I mean, Lutri is a 2/0. It's both the creature and the spell you copy with it, but it's only going to come into play really late. I think it's going to get played by somebody being silly. Tom de Waal, he will try and use this card, and he will be moderately to pretty successful with it. Emma, Kobe, these are the kind of people that really, really like this kind of effect and will try to break it. Riel the Everwise is a 3-mana mythic and a 0/3 creature that gets +1/+0 for each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard. Whenever you discard 1 or more cards for the first time each turn, draw that many cards. So this is a card that goes in overtime in blue-red decks, but it is taking up one of those rare slots and putting a creature with 3 toughness in it. While undeniably powerful and suiting the deck, I think blue-red spells want something more self-protecting in their slots, and I think that only the Ironcrag Pyromancer might be threatened by this, but I don't see it happening. Post-rotation, there's definitely going to be space for Riel in that deck, but for now I don't see it happening. Once we get post-rotation and Ominous Seas becomes maybe a more important aspect of that deck, then Riel will be an auto slot in there. So I would just get your foil now and then get ready to rotate your deck once we hit that point. Sprite Dragon for 2 mana, uncommon. You get a 1/1 flying haste fairy dragon, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on it. Goes into the same deck, blue-red spells, obviously, but its bigger brother, Crackling Drake, just laughs in its face. It's a better card. It might be better than Fairy Vandal, though. Fairy Vandal does give you that flexibility, but this grows faster than Fairy Vandal by a margin. So it might replace that in some decks for people. We will see. Labyrinth Raptor is a 2-mana rare nightmare dinosaur creature with menace 2/2. Whenever a creature you control with menace becomes blocked, defending player sacrifices a creature blocking it. Creatures you control with menace get +1/+0 until end of turn. There is some support for menace in this deck, but all in all, I think this is just a crap rare. Obosh the Prey Piercer is a 5-mana rare legendary companion. You can only use it as a companion if your starting deck contains only cards with odd converted mana costs and land cards. If swords you control with an odd converted mana cost would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals double that damage to that permanent or player instead. We already saw the black-red one that let you with only even converted mana costs, which usually is something you can work around. In most meta games, Obosh the Prey Piercer would be a far worse card to include in your deck. Here though, because we already have Rakdos Sacrifice that heavily relies on Mayhem Devil and Cauldron Familiar and Witch's Oven, I do think you can morph your Rakdos Sacrifice deck to include this and make your Mayhem Devils twice as scary. So I definitely think this is going to get played. and I don't think it's to a degree where it is problematic. Sonorous Howl Bonder is a 3 mana uncommon 2/2 menace. Each creature you control with menace can't be blocked except by 3 or more creatures. I just think this is overkill. If you have multi-menace already, you'll probably have enough to go, and you probably want to have some other abilities onto your creatures to make it more problematic for your opponent, or just make them bigger. Back for More is a 6 mana uncommon instant that returns target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. When you do, it fights up to 1 target creature you don't control. At best, this is a one-off in the graveyard interaction decks. I think it's overcosted for what it does and risks clogging your hand if you have more than them. It being instant is pretty nutty though. So I don't think I want more than one, but I think I want one for all the awesomeness that it might provide. Boneyard Lurker is a 4 mana uncommon 4/4. You can mutate it for 4. Whenever it does mutate, you return target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. Again, mitigating the risk you take by mutating with getting an extra card in your hand. Other than that, it is a 4/4 for 4. 4 toughness, pretty big right now. So I do expect to see this in those graveyards interactive Sultai or Golgari decks. Cheville, Bane of Monsters is a 2 mana mythic 1/3 creature with Death Touch. At the beginning of your upkeep, if your opponents control no permanents with bounty counters on them, put a bounty counter on target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls. Whenever a permanent an opponent controls with a bounty counter on it dies, you gain 3 life and draw a card. Definitely a card you can build around with. It becomes a card draw engine, but it is, according to me, too frail to really invest heavily into. At 3 toughness, it dies to too much removal, and even though it has Death Touch, it just trades unfavorably. So I would not play this card unless you have infinite recursion, but then we get back to the fact that the marquee red removal spell is Scorching Dragonfire, and that makes that really awkward. So too frail for me. Your mileage may vary. Fiend Artisan is a 2 mana mythic 1/1 that gets +1/+1 for each creature card in your graveyard. For X and green or black, you may sacrifice another creature, search your library for a creature card with converted mana cost X or less, put it into the battlefield, then shuffle your library. You can only activate this ability anytime you could cast a sorcery. If you are playing the self-mill creature-based Golgari Sultai deck, you should have this one. It's both your finisher, it's your utility, and it lets you increase that toolbox aspect of your deck. You put a bunch of one-off creatures in your deck that deal with tons of different things. You can find them like this, and because your deck should be focused on getting stuff from the graveyard and self-milling, you'll also find them fast enough. So this is just perfect package. If this deck becomes a thing, then this will be in it. Skull Prophet is a 2 mana uncommon 3/1 that you can tap for black or green, and can also mill yourself for 2 cards. If that self-mill deck becomes a thing, then I do see people turning to this because it will be mana hungry and should be pretty juicy. Umori the Collector is a 4 mana rare companion creature. It's a 4/5. As it enters the battlefield, you have to choose a card type, and spells of the chosen card type are 1 less to cast. Now, to have it as a companion, each non-land card in your starting deck needs to share a card type. That's good because that means its ability is going to affect all non-land cards in your deck, but it's also a bit problematic because the deck we kind of want to be using this in is super heavy creature based, and the colors it puts us most likely in either creature based ramp or reanimation. In ramp it still works very well. Even you'll be ramping with creatures rather with spells, but we have tons of little druids wanting to help us out, Fertilite as well, so it's pretty nice there. I do think this is going to get played, and at a 4 mana 4/5 for free is pretty nice to have. Jagenta the Wellspring is a 5 mana rare 5/5 companion No card in your starting deck can have more than one of the same symbol in its mana cost, and you can tap it for the 5 different colors of mana, but it can't be spent to pay generic mana costs. So this is your companion if you want to play 5-color green, which is a super fun and surprising deck to bring to the table. Nobody really ever knows what you're going to plan, and try to optimize that 5 mana. Its best buddy is Niv-Mizzet Reborn, obviously, which you can just cast by casting this one, and will find you tons and tons and tons of other cards, while enabling, if you play it like this, you also enable yourself to be set up to get maximum advantage of the Elk's mana there as well. So will it get played? Yes, because it's a fun and cool deck, and as a 5 mana 5/5 for free, it's pretty juicy on top of it. Proud Wildbonder is a 4 mana uncommon 4/3 trample that says creatures you control with trample you may have this creature assign its combat damage as though it weren't blocked. It's nice if you are going that trample matters theme. It's definitely something you want to consider. Unfortunately, that 3 toughness really knocks him down a bit. Don't think it will get played mainly for that reason, but I might be mistaken. The ability itself isn't as good as a lot of people think, because it makes it so that you don't kill their creatures anymore, which a lot of people seem to forget. Quartz Wood Crasher is a 5 mana rare 6/6 trample, and whenever one or more creatures you control with trample deal combat damage to a player, create an XX green dinosaur creature token with trample, where X is the amount of damage those creatures dealt to that player. This is the card that makes the whole trample matters ram through strategy worth it, and should be considered for sure. Zilorta Strength Incarnate is a 5 mana mythic 7/3 that has trample, and lethal damage dealt to creatures you control is determined by their power rather than their toughness. So it puts the number that is their power and puts it instead of their toughness, but only to determine whether or not they should die from damage. That means if you have a 0x, it will not die unless it actually gets damage. That's very important. This doesn't kill 0x creatures. That said, that turns this into a 5 mana 7/7 trampler. If you're playing the Trample Matters deck, you probably want to look into this and maybe optimize some of your creatures for that modifier. Just keep into account that you don't always have it there, so don't go overboard with relying on this effect. Regal Leosaur is a 2 mana uncommon 2/2. You can mutate it for 3, and whenever this creature mutates, other creatures you control get +2/+1 until end of turn. If you are going for a go white strategy, and that can be in non-red decks because the mutate cost is hybrid, then this might get played. I am afraid that just casting a pump spell that gives everything +2/+1 is better, and this will not actually get played. Savai Thundermare is a 2 mana uncommon 3/2 red-white mana. Whenever you cycle a card, you may pay 2. When you do, it deals 2 damage to target creature and you gain 2 life. If you're playing the red-white cycling deck, that's probably going to be featured in there at a really respectable body and a free shock the turn after. Pretty nice. Winota, Joiner of Forces, is a 4 mana mythic for 4 legendary creature. Whenever a non-human creature you control attacks, she's a human herself, look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may put a human creature card from among them onto the battlefield tapped and attacking. It gains indestructible until end of turn. Put the rest of the cards on the bottom of your library in a random order. A really solid card if you want to be building around it, if you can build around it. This triggers for every non-human creature you control. And don't forget that we have the red spell, the red sorcery that makes a 1/1 dinosaur token with haste and a human token. So if you're going for that human non-human deck, Winona is definitely something you'll be playing around. Currently, I haven't really seen enough support for it, but because it's creature type based, you can find support for this all over the place. So not sure if it's there, but I wouldn't be surprised if it is very much so. It's going to be rough getting that distribution of humans and non-humans. On the other hand, you get to look at 10% of your deck. So if 10% of your deck is non-humans and you have enough 10% of your deck is humans, you have, what is it, like 78% or something chance to hit it. I'm sure somebody will calculate that, and it's probably called Frank Karsten, who will give you the number you need to optimize it. I think it will get played. It's going to create some really cool board states, and but I don't think it's reliable enough to become a core of the metagame. Zenith Flare is a 4 mana uncommon instant. It deals X damage to any target and you gain X life, where X is the number of cards with a cycling ability in your graveyard. I don't think this will be played because it only deals damage to creatures, right? To any target. Ah, no. In that case, I think it will get played in the Cycling Matters deck, if the Cycling Matters deck is good enough, and at this point, I don't think it is, so I have my doubts there. Zirda the Dawnwalker is a 3 mana rare companion. It's a 3/3. Each permanent card in your starting deck has to have an activated ability to have it as your companion. That's a really rough restriction for Gentry. Abilities you activate that aren't mana abilities cost 2 less to activate. This effect can't reduce the mana in that cost to less than 1 mana. And it has an activated ability itself that makes it so that target creature can't block this turn. I have no clue about this card. I haven't looked up every activated ability in Standard so far. Is it possible that this will end up playable? Yes. Unfortunately, with its mana cost, I think it's mostly focused at being an aggressive-oriented deck. But think, for example, it allows you to have Witch's Oven and Sanatorium Skeleton, and that Sanatorium Skeleton is returning with just 1 black mana. That's pretty nice already. Is that nice enough? I don't know. Probably isn't. But if that's one thing I can think of the top of my head right now, there's probably others that I am not thinking about. Next up, we have Alert Heat Bonder, a 3 mana uncommon 2/4 Vigilance. At the beginning of your end step, you gain 1 life for each creature you control with Vigilance. This might slot into the Toughness Matters deck, but I think that will be focused more on actually converting your creature's toughness into damage rather than gaining some life off guaranteeing that all of them have vigilance. If you do though, Frontland Philidar is a 4 mana 3/5 vigilance that gives all your creatures with vigilance tap target creature. I don't think this will be played because it's pretty narrow. It doesn't have a crazy impact on its own. Yeah, that's about it. Kahira, the Orphan Guard, Bagheera, is a rare 3/2 cat beast. It's a companion. You can only use it as a companion if each creature in your starting deck is a cat, elemental, nightmare, dinosaur, or beast. It has vigilance, and each other creature you control that's a cat, elemental, nightmare, dinosaur, or beast gets +1/+1 and has vigilance. This is playable, period. You can make a pretty nice aggro deck that curves into Kahira as a curve topper or even just as your 3-drop. Following this after 1-drop, 2-drop in the appropriate creature types makes for a really strong start of the game. I will get played. Will it be good enough? Maybe. The fact that Ayani's Pridemate is a cat as well maybe unlocks this already a little bit, but we will see. Keruga is a 5 mana rare companion. Your starting deck contains only cards with converted mana cost 3 or greater and land cards if this card is your chosen companion. Yeah. When it enters the battlefield, draw a card for each other permanent you control with converted mana cost 3 or greater. I find this a really hard one. It pretty much concedes to mono red in a big way and will need to have a lot of regrow mechanics in it to regain life mechanics in it to be viable. That said, having an extra card that gives you extra cards is really strong. So if you're fighting against a bunch of control decks and mid-range decks, this is going to be a really big problem for them. But any aggro deck will just be happy to pounce on you like crazy. I do think this will need to get paired with one of the 3 other colors just to have sweepers available to you. Do I think it's playable? Yes. If somebody going to show up with it, yes. Is it going to be good? I'm not sure. Kinnan, Bonder Prodigy, is a 2 mana legendary creature human druid. Whenever you tap a non-land permanent for mana, add 1 mana of that type. That permanent concluded. So it doubles up your mana as a 2-drop. For 7 mana, you get to look at the top 5 cards. You may put a non-human creature card from among them onto the battlefield. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. This seems really good. In blue-green Flash, you can play this on turn 4 and have your Frilled Mystic available. And that deck had some issues with finding nice Mythics rares. So yeah, I do think this is going to be played. Ah, wait, it's non-land permanents though. Aha, okay. That makes it a lot less broken. Jesus. In that case, unplayable in Gentry. Well, that was easy. Parcel Beast is a 4 mana uncommon 2/4 with mutate 2. So that's a big discount you're getting. For 1 mana and a tap, you get to look at the top card of your library. If it's a land card, you may put it onto the battlefield. If you don't put it onto the battlefield, put it into your hand. This is a really strong card advantage engine, and I have been really impressed with it so far. Mutating it onto a nice 2-drop is awesome because then it has your activation available. If you manage to mutate onto something that has vigilance, you also get the attack on top of it. I've been really impressed with it so far in limited, but I worry that it is too clunky in Gentry. That said, it has 4 toughness, it survives a lot of the interaction we currently see, and I am going to try and play it, but I think this is just that engine that's just a little bit too slow. Primal Empathy is a 3 mana uncommon enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, you draw a card if you control a creature with the greatest power. Otherwise, you put a +1/+1 counter on a creature you control. I honestly think this is too slow, and if the fact that if your opponent manages to keep all creatures off your board, it doesn't do anything anymore, really strikes it and makes it unplayable for me. Trumpeting Gnar is a 3 mana uncommon 3/3. It has mutate 5, that's a big uptick, but whenever it mutates, you create a 3/3 green beast creature token, which is a crazy big mid-game advantage to have. It really benefits from having other cheap things to mutate onto for curving purposes, which makes it slightly awkward to put in the blue-green shell, but it has the power level. At this point, the blue-green shell has a lot of really good uncommons though, so you will probably have to choose between focusing on power toughness or focusing on card drawing, card selection. Adaptive Shimmerer is a 5 mana common 0/0 with flash. It enters the battlefield with 3+1/+1 counters, and while that is a really juicy base to mutate onto because you get those +1/+1 counters, it's just overcosted for what it does. I don't think it should see play in Gentry. The lands are reprinted and there was much rejoicing, a lot of pretty arts as well, and this is another opportunity to gather your foil ones. So these are staples in Gentry, as about as stapley as it gets. If you're playing the colors, you're playing some of these lands, period. Bonder's Enclave is a rare land. You can tap it for colorless, or you can tap it to draw a card for 3 mana, but only if you have a creature with power 4 or greater. Won't get played in Gentry. You'd rather have that creature with power 4 as the rare. Crystalline Giant is a 3 mana 3/3. It gets one random, gets one thing. Counter at random that doesn't have yet. This is just too slow, not gonna be played. Evolving Wilds back as well, also with really cool art. It's probably gonna be awesome in foil as well. Farfinder, I've been pretty impressed by. Just having a base to mutate onto that has vigilance is a pretty big deal. But then again, I'm in love with Parcel Beast, and having a Parcel Beast mutate onto Farfinder is some of the most fun I've had in Limited so far. And do I think it will get played? Actually, I don't think so. I hope so, but I don't think so. We've had comparable effects in the past that weren't played, so there's that. The crystals are a cycle of 5. They're all uncommons, and that really scratches them as unplayable in Gentry. The cycle of lands, same thing, they're rares, unplayable in Gentry. A common dual land, crystal, triope, so staple, borderline unplayable, definitely unplayable. Mysterious Egg is a 1 mana 0/2. Whenever it mutates, you can put a +1/+1 counter on it. This is the bad little brother of the green 2/2 that gives a +1/+1 counter to any creature that mutates and gives you 2 life. I personally think this one is unplayable. It pushes you towards multi-mutating, which is a bad idea unless you have a lot of payoff for it or protection. If you do want to go into single colored mutate decks though, this might become necessary, but I'd be very unhappy to have to play this. The fact that there's only, as far as I know, one creature that one creature that mutates for 2 mana makes having a 1 mana mutate base not so interesting. If you do want one, just go for the Brushwag. It gives you trample and the pump ability for the mid game. I think that's a lot better than Mysterious Egg. Crystal, unfortunately uncommon. Triome is a rare. Rugged is a staple. La la la. Sleeper Dart, 2 mana, common artifact. When it enters the battlefield, draw a card. Target creature doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. Might get some slots in the... We have this weird artifact deck still in Gentry that uses the what's it called, engineer, that taps for 2 colorless mana, but you can only use it for artifacts. It might get some slots in there, probably from the sideboard, as that deck can win just off tempo alone. The fact that it doesn't tap only stops it from untapping is a big strike against it though. Springjaw Trap, the flash version of something we already have, might find a home in the same deck. Its activation cost is 1 higher, but I think that's just going to kill it because there's too little advantage to the flash. Basic land, Swiftwater Cliff, again, beautiful art. The Ozolith is a legendary artifact for 1 mana. It's a rare. Whenever a creature you control leaves the battlefield, if it had counters on it, put those counters on the Ozolith. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if the Ozolith has counters on it, you may remove all counters from the Ozolith onto target creature. I fail to see this being a thing in Gentry. It requires you to really build around it, and it's still a rare that you have a hard time finding. Basic dual lands, Crystal, Triome, Brokos, Apex of Forever, is a 5 mana Simic, a legendary creature that you can mutate for 6. It's a 6/6 with trample, and you may cast it from your graveyard using its mutate ability. Wow. So this is Escape 2.0 in the Sultai self-mill decks. This really should be played. We'll see play for sure. A recurring big trampler, yes. Death's Oasis is a 3-mana rare enchantment. Whenever a non-token creature you control dies, put the top 2 cards of your library into your graveyard, then return a creature card with lesser converted mana cost to your hand. Sacrifice Oasis, you gain life equal to the creature's converted mana cost. Is this good enough? It's interesting for sure, but I think there will always be better options in that color combination. Eerie Ultimatum, the ultimatums are back, is a 7-mana rare sorcery. It returns any number of permanent cards with different names from your graveyard to the battlefield. I think people will play this. I mean, this just if you build your deck correctly, this brings back every creature in your graveyard, which is insane. And even if it only brings back a bunch, the mana cost is super prohibitive though. Yeah, no, there's better things you can do with your mana than this. It is a near I win card if you cast it, but it's just too rough. Emergent Ultimatum, 7-mana rare sorcery. Search your library for up to 3 monocolored cards with different names and exile them. An opponent chooses one of those cards, shuffle that card into your library. You may cast the other cards without paying their mana cost. Exile Emergent Ultimatum. So this, if you build your deck around it, searches your 3 other rares and you get to play them. But if it's the last one you draw, it's super awkward. And I don't think people should play this. Genesis Ultimatum, 7-mana, 5-mana rare sorcery. Look at the top 5 cards of your library. Put any number of permanent cards from among them onto the battlefield and the rest into your hand. Exile Genesis Ultimatum. This is, I don't even need to doubt, this is too random, needs way too much setup to get there. Illuna, Apex of Wishes, is a 5-mana mythic 6/6 flying trample that you can mutate for 6. When this creature mutates, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land permanent. Put that card onto the battlefield or into your hand. People will play this. It's fun, it's cool, it's big, and it gets you card advantage. Will get played. It's random though, so probably shouldn't get played. Inspired Ultimatum, 7-mana rare sorcery. Target player gains 5 life and it deals 5 damage to any target. Then you draw 5 cards. I don't think this should get played. At this point, we're getting to a state of the metagame where you can play counter control. And people next doors are doing construction. And just getting to a point where you can tap 7 mana to do something like this isn't really going to happen. I think people are gonna try it, but I don't think it's really that good. It's really good against decks that can't counter back, but you're opening yourself up to a pretty strong blowout. So, Narset of the Ancient Way, 4-mana mythic planeswalker. Starts off with 4 loyalty, +1, you gain 2 life, add blue, red, or white, spend this mana only to cast a non-creature spell, -2, draw a card, then you may discard a card. When you discard a non-land card, the Narset of the Ancient Way deals damage equal to that card's converted mana cost to target creature or player. -6, you get an emblem with, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, this emblem deals 2 damage to any target. It can only plus with mana, that makes it rather awkward the turn you play it. Draw, then you may discard with a high converted mana cost for damage. I don't think this is where you want to be in Gentry. Something that pluses for just mana, even though it's in colors that really struggle with that, isn't really that interesting. No, I don't think this should get played. Nethroi, Apex of Death, is a 5-mana mythic 5/5 Death Touch lifelink. You can mutate it for 7 mana. Whenever it mutates, return any number of target creature cards with total power 10 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. I think this will get played, and people will focus on breaking this with the self-mill deck. Offspring's Revenge is a 5 mana rare enchantment, red, white, and black mana. At the beginning of combat on your turn, exile target red, white, or black creature from your graveyard. Create a token that's a copy of that card, except it's a 1/1 and it gains haste until end of your next turn. I think this requires way too much setup to make it really worth it and doesn't give enough reward for it. Compare that to the 4/4 flying for 4 that does the same thing for every creature instead of just one per turn, and only when they die. I'd say it's a lot more interesting a card to build around to have explosive turns. I don't think that's going to be played. Ruinous Ultimatum, 7 mana sorcery, destroy all non-land permanents your opponents control. I don't see people playing this, period. Snapdax, Apex of the Hunt, is a 4 mana mythic 3/5 double strike creature, so it's technically a 6/5 sort of, and it has mutate 6. Whenever this creature mutates, it deals 4 damage to target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls, and you gain 4 life. That's big and scary, and it interacts with the board, but it's in awkward colors for mutate deck, so I don't think this will be that impressive. Song of Creation is a 4 mana enchantment. You may play an additional land. Whenever you cast a spell, draw 2 cards, and at the beginning of your end step, discard your hand. If you play around this, there's a lot you can do with that. And with a deck built around focusing on returning stuff to your hand to start off chains, this is actually really nice to have. I think in Emma's Storm deck, this is going to get played, but it needs a really specific deck to work. The crazy thing is there currently is that deck, so it is going to get played. Not an arena probably, because then you lose because you can't finish your game fast enough. Titan's Nest is a 4 mana rare enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, look at the top card of your library. You may put that card into your graveyard. Exile a card from your graveyard, add colorless, spend this mana only to cast a colored spell without X in its mana cost. This might actually get played in Sultai Self-Mill. It represents a lot of mana there. You can do it anytime, you can do it as many times as you want. Maybe the problem is it doesn't actually impact the board on its own, which is what you usually want to look for in rares. It's crazy good utility though. It's just mana though. I don't think this should go into a Gentry deck. Vadrok, Apex of Thunder, is a 3 mana mythic 3/3 flying first strike elemental dinosaur cat legendary creature. You can mutate it for 4. Whenever it mutates, you may cast a non-creature card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard without paying its mana cost. They're pushing Izzet spells to Jeskai spells. They might actually succeed. There's a bunch of tools that we've seen now. People will try to build Jeskai spells, but I think Izzet spells for now is going to be better. Whirlwind of Thought is our last card, is a 4 mana rare enchantment. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, draw a card. Yeah, okay, so if you're building Jeskai spells, Narset, Whirlwind of Thought, and Vadrok are probably in your set. Vadrok has the advantage of being paired with blue for nice mutate, but it's not a non-creature spell. So of those 3, I think Vadrok is the least likely to be played. And that concludes my review of all the cards, every single card in Ikoria for Gentry. This ended up being more of a where can you play it, how can you play it review than a straight up this is good, this is bad. But I hope it gives a lot of people interesting ideas for deck in the future. If you liked this video, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and check out the other videos in this set review.